Good morning, Idaho. Hope you're having a wonderful morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on when you're listening to this. Welcome to the Local Yokel Idaho podcast, where we talk about what is going on in the wonderful state of Idaho. Yet again, today we are going to skip the morning banter. I just didn't have much to talk about or share because I've just been really focused this week on trying to catch up and get stuff done. The news section is a little smaller. There's just not as much going on. We've got politics, which is also smaller this week as well, and that's just due to the legislature ending this week and kind of wrapping up. So a little bit more of a slow week, but still some stuff to talk about. But in any case, we'll move on here into the holidays and interesting events for the week. Moving into holidays and interesting events for the week, we have Monday the 10th of April, which is National Farmers Day and National Siblings Day. As for history, in 1858, Big Ben, a 13.76-ton bell, was recast at the Whitechapel Bell Foundry. In 1912, the HMS Titanic set sail from Southampton on her maiden and last voyage. In 1972, the U.S., the USSR, and 70 nations agreed to ban biological weapons. As for birthdays, Monday was George Arliss and Mary Morgan's birthday, and is Daisy Ridley's 30th birthday. As for deaths, in 1806, Horatio Gates died. Moving on to Tuesday the 11th of April, which is National Submarine Day, Pet Day, and National Barbershop Quartet Day. As for in history, in 1968, Lyndon B. Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act. In 19, the first modern submarine was designed, built, and purchased by the U.S. Navy. Who else? And in 2015, Barack Obama and Raul Castro met in Panama, making it the first time since the Cuban Revolution that a U.S. and Cuban heads of state had met. As for birthdays, Tuesday is Ethel Kennedy's 94th birthday. As for deaths, in 1926, Luther Burbank died. And in 2013, Jonathan Winters died. Wednesday the 12th of April is National Grilled Cheese Sandwich Day and National Licorice Day. As for in history, in 1811, the first U.S. colonists arrived on the Pacific coast at Cape Disappointment in Washington. In 1872, Jesse James's gang robbed $1,500 in Columbia, Kentucky. And lastly, in 1961, Yuri Gagarin became the first person to orbit the Earth. As for birthdays, Wednesday is David Letterman's 75th birthday. And as for deaths, in 1945, Franklin D. Roosevelt died. In 1975, Joseph Baker died. In 1981, Joe Louis died. And lastly, in 1989, Sugar Robinson died. Next is Thursday, April 13th, which is National Peach Cobbler Day. Oh, my favorite. Scrabble Day and National Thomas Jefferson Day. As for in history, in 1860, the first Pony Express rider reached Sacramento, California. In 1964, New Zealand shepherd Colin Bosher set a record for shearing 565 sheep in one workday. And lastly, in 1970, Apollo 13 returned its famous message after its oxygen tanks exploded en route to the moon, quoting, "Okay, Houston, we have a problem," end quote. As for birthdays, Thursday was Thomas Jefferson's birthday. Friday the 14th of April, which is National Gardening Day and Pecan Day. Love the gardening. Pecans are pretty good as well. As for in history, in 1865, President Abraham Lincoln was shot in the head by John Wilkes Booth at the Ford Theater in Washington. In 1912, the HMS Titanic hit an iceberg at 11:40 p.m. near Newfoundland and sank in the early mornings of April 15th. In 1935, a severe dust storm ravaged the U.S. Midwest, later nicknamed the Dust Bowl. And lastly, in 1981, the first space shuttle returned to Earth. As for birthdays, nothing to know, but in deaths, we have one in 1759, George Handel died. That brings us to Saturday the 15th of April, which is National Laundry Day. I don't know why we have that. We got plenty of laundry to do. Why do we need to celebrate a day for it? But anywho, National Titanic Remembrance Day and Tax Day for all those that need to get those filed here soon. As for in history, in 1861, the U.S. Federal Army of 75,000 volunteers mobilized by President Abraham Lincoln for the Civil War. And in 1955, Ray Kroc opened the first McDonald's fast food restaurant. As for birthdays, Saturday was Leonardo da Vinci's, Mikhail Gorbachev's, Lita Gray, and Elizabeth Montgomery's birthday, and is Emma Watson's 32nd birthday. As for deaths, in 1865, as we talked about above, Abraham Lincoln died, and in 1912, Edward Smith died. Lastly, that brings us to Sunday the 16th of April, which is National Orchid Day. As for in history, just two, in 1705, Queen Anne of England knighted Isaac Newton at Trinity College, and in 1900, the U.S. Post Office issued the first book of stamps. As for birthdays, Sunday was Wilbur Wright's and Charlie Chaplin's birthday, and is Martin Lawrence's 57th birthday. As for deaths, in 1958, Rosalind Franklin died, and in 1991, David Lean died. Moving into the news here, we have our first story, Ann Morrison and Boise bench connection. This comes by the Boise Dev by Dawn Day. For those in Boise, you know what I mean, but for those outside the Treasure Valley / Boise area, let me explain. Ann Morrison is one of Boise's biggest parks and the most well-kept. It covers about 153 acres and sits right across the street from Boise's other biggest park, Catherine Albertson's Park. Both of these parks sit underneath the Boise Bench, which is a very tall, sheer cliff that separates the city of Boise. If you want to go to Ann Morrison, you have to go down one of two roads on each side of the park, but you can't go to it directly from houses on top of the bench. Well, the city is having an open house day, April 10th, to talk about building a stairway that would go down the face of the bench and connect more people directly to the park. It would be located on the southeast side of the park by the softball fields. With that said, people would be able to use it, but cyclists could also use it. They would just have to pick up their bikes. The estimated cost for the project would be about $850,000. That would be paid by the Open Space and Clean Water Levy Fund, which I think is really cool idea to have, a little bit of an easier way to connect. I mean, technically, I feel like I shouldn't say this, but technically there is already a back way to get into the park, and it's not like the main roads. I think it's on the, let me think here, southwest part of the park. There is a trail that people have created that goes down the side or the edge or the cliff of it that you can walk down, and then it connects to an access / park maintenance trail that's back there, and then you can walk in that and it spits you out into the park. And I know a lot of people take that rather than trying to go all the way around, so there's kind of already this thing that exists and people use. But then again, on the other hand, having something that's more dedicated with the nice stairways and everything to come down would be much nicer. I think the last couple of weeks I've reported on the open house meetings that they're having. So if you guys need input or in the area and want to talk about it, I think they're having it at the Boise Depot or whatever. I know they went for the staircase design, which I think is a good idea, because, pedestrians, and then it makes bikers slow down. So, instead of having to do a big zigzag design that costs a lot of money, and you could have really, really fast, crazy bikers trying to go down the hill and everything, it's a little bit safer. The bikers just have to pick up their bikes. But the other side, it's if you're doing all this stuff and there's already the green belt and there's so many people that are going to be using their bikes, why don't you just make it a little bit more bike friendly? But I could see where people say, well, just go down to the two roads and ride down, and then you can connect up to the thing, which that's a fair point to be made. But it'll be cool to see as it develops. If it ends up happening, I intend to drop by the park and see it being built there. But in any case, I thought it was something worth sharing with you guys. Now, moving on to our next story, you'll kind of notice as we're going on, there's not a ton of stories today, just kind of a little bit of a slower week. More of it's in politics than it is here in the news section of stuff. But in any case, here's the second one of the fastest growing counties in Idaho. This comes by KTVB7 by Janelle Finch. For us here in the Valley, and I assume the rest of the state, there's always a venting conversation being had where locals grumble about how much the state is growing and how it's changing. Well, have you ever wondered what are the fastest growing counties in the states? And I don't just mean Canyon County and Ada County, which technically you're right. What are the fastest counties outside of that? Well, Benawa is the one for that. From 2021 to 2022, the city has seen a population growth of 4.3%, which doesn't seem like much, but when it means every year they're getting 200 new property requests a year, it adds up quickly and can make for an otherwise very small county starting to feel very full. Part of the theory of why this is happening is due to all the elder retirees moving to the county, which brings their grandchildren or children with them. With that said, the county, according to the article, doesn't seem unwelcome to outsiders. It just has some growing pains and frustrations like everywhere else in the state, which is understandable. I mean, we'll get into it, I think, later down. I have a story that we're going to just talk about the U.S. Census that came out and looking at kind of that effect here in Idaho. But we're pretty much growing everywhere. It's to be expected. Don't know. I should have done it. This week was a little bit of a rush because I'm trying to get back on schedule. If you have noticed the last couple weeks, I kind of fell behind. And so this week was kind of a rush to catch up on things. So I didn't get to do as much research as I would have normally liked to. But I don't know what the towns are there in Benewah County. Hopefully I'm saying that right. And what the attraction is, if it's just the cost of living or the view, and there's people that are like, well, I have remote work, and so I'll move there. They also stated here the theory with grandparents and a lot of retirees, which makes sense. The grandparents retire there, and the kids are like, well, I can do remote work now, and grandma and grandpa are up there, and well, why don't we just move up there and join them and enjoy the kind of peace and quiet of a little bit of a small community, which I don't blame you. But I guess what are your guys' thoughts? Do you feel that you're kind of drawn to go more out to the rural areas? Or have you chosen to kind of be more in the big city where you want to be in the center of the hustle bustle? I think it's kind of a personality thing that ends up happening with people that they're like, well, I like all these things, but, I'd rather have less people. And then you have other people that are really big introvert or really big extroverts, should I say, that are just like, yes, I want all the things. I like the busyness. I like the hustle and bustle. And if I'm not having it, I feel so bored. And they just don't like it. I kind of landed in between there where I like the hustle bustle. I'm a bit of an extrovert. I like to go see and do things. But on the other hand, I don't like there being a huge ton of people and it's really, really, really busy. So I kind of land in the middle of all that. Next one is Pinehurst ChurchBell rings again. This comes by the Shoshone News Press by Molly Roberts. So this is a feel-good story, maybe not newsworthy, but I felt it was worth sharing. In Pinehurst, Idaho, there is a church. It is one of the very first buildings that was built for the town. It was redesigned around 1932, but one of the signature parts of its design is a tall bell tower that houses a real bell. Back in the day, it was rung every Sunday to call those in town to come to church service, but about 40 years ago, it stopped ringing. Some speculated it had to do with the change of ringers and or that the structure holding the bell up was getting unstable, but no one really knew. Quoting a man that has gone to the church for most of his life, quote, "I've been going to church since I was born, and I think the bell stopped ringing when I was around 8 years old," Mark said. "We've been told rumors from many years from some of the old guys in the church that it's going to be a big project, and it's not really easy to get to, so nothing really ever got done," end quote. With that said, Mark and his coworker were talking about it one day in the church graveyard. They decided to see if they could find out why it wasn't working and to see if they could fix it. When they ended up getting into the tight bell tower, they found that an old heavy leather belt was nailed to the frame that was preventing the bell from working. They then removed it and the bell was able to be rung again. They also discovered that the bell is 32 inches across at the bottom and are looking into the history and how it was made. So this Sunday, if you're traveling through Pinehurst, you can hear the bell ringing this Sunday around 11 a.m. for Easter service and hopefully into the future, which I am always a sucker for these kind of old stories or like small town America. Like, I don't know, everyone just rumor this and that and they discover and kind of go through. I wonder why the belt was there. The church probably wanted, I'm guessing, this is me going on a limb, that at some point way in the past, everyone's like, it's too much work and no one wants to volunteer to do the bell and to be there at time. So let's just put a permanent fixing thing so children don't mess with it. And then when we find someone to do it, then we'll have it done. And then certain people left and different stuff, and that would be a more logical answer. But I can't help but part of my brain kind of speculating that there was some mysterious reason that someone didn't like the church and they tried to do something to stop the bell from ringing, and then the church people didn't want to mess with it or whatever else. Hopefully it was just the belt that was the issue and the structure is sound. I assume it is, since they're being able to ring it and it's been inspected. I assume so. I don't know. That is a question to be had for them, but I do know I'm going to put it on the map to definitely look at when I'm traveling, and hopefully traveling there through Pinehurst. I don't think I've ever been there in my travels. I've been through a couple different small towns in Idaho, and I continue to try to explore and see more. The name sounds familiar, but I can't recall exactly where it's at. I'm going to guess up north somewhere, but I am not 100% sure where exactly up north. Godspeed to them. It sounds like an amazing gift to have for their Easter service, and hopefully everything went off without a hitch this Sunday. This next one is a little bit of a government one / politics, but I still wanted to have it in here because I think it was relevant. New Idaho government tracking tool. This comes by the Boise dev by Autumn Robertsons. So this is really cool. The state of Idaho's controller's office has released a new tool that is part of the Transparent Idaho website. This aims to make what the state and local governments are doing easier to see and thus keep elected people accountable. With that said, the new tool allows people to see state and local government financial data. This includes spending on school districts, roads, and other services. It also lets people see the county's fund balances, positions, salaries, and also how property taxes affect the budget, plus allowing people to compare cities and counties. Before this, information such as this could only be gotten by public record request. Now you can just go to the website and see it in live time, which I think is awesome. I am all for more transparency, making it easier for the common man to know stuff. That's part of why I made the podcast, that you guys could regularly just listen in, and be it political or news-wise, you could be well informed of general new businesses or fun events or politics, and so that you could keep either your elected people accountable, or if there's a business that you care about, you could support it, or just be aware and be connected in your community. And this is another example of something like that. So that makes me really excited. I intend to go over and check out the website, but I think this is great so that, people are always saying, well, government spends this and government does that. And that's a fair point. It is bloated and it does have less, competition in the sense of capitalism to kind of keep it in check. But something like this is really great. It allows the common person to just log on and be like, hey, where is my money going? And if they can see something, they're like, I don't understand that. Then please reach out to your city council or your state or the treasurer, because every time I've interacted with any of them at different events or dinners and stuff, they love to get interactions for people, especially if they're respectful. I mean, I think that's normal for any human being. If you're not being respectful in your interactions with your elected officials, then they're going to struggle. But they love to hear people's feedback, even if it's feedback they disagree with. Just make it be respectful and to be like, hey, I saw this online and I'm a little concerned. Could you explain why this is happening and blah, blah, blah. They love to hear public input because for them, sometimes they're a little isolated in their bubble. They're in their elected offices and they're just so busy managing so many things. Hearing from people really helps them to know where you guys want the funds and where you don't want it and other stuff. And they just love to have interactions from the public. Most of the ones I've interacted with, I don't know about certain politicians that may be corrupt or maybe don't care about hearing their constituents, which I'm not pointing at any, may also then not like it, which would raise some red flags for me when they're not open for people to talk with them or interact, or they don't really get back, because that's kind of a little bit of a concern. But I will admit, the further you go up the ladder, so like if you're talking about the governor stuff, or even like if you're getting to your federal people, you're going to get a lot more of a canned response, and it takes more time to get up that ladder if you're a name that isn't connected in groups and stuff. But if you're talking to your district person, I can't remember the title they have, or county people, they get back very, very quickly, and they are super, super welcoming. I will say, except for Ada County is kind of in a little bit of turmoil there. But the Canyon County people, they have been just amazing, and it's always enjoyable to talk with them, and it's all kind of almost like a family environment. Everyone kind of knows everyone, and they're just welcoming to have people involved to help and contribute and to push forward the development and improvement of the area. So, yeah, any case, I got on a sidetrack there, but I think this is cool. If you're interested to see what your town or county is doing, I'd highly recommend just pop it up this weekend or during the week and take a quick peruse, because you might find something out interesting you didn't know, or like, oh, cool, they're funding that. I didn't know my money was going to that. Or you can say, wait a second, that's not where I want it. And you can kind of get on them and let them know that you really don't want that. Then we come to our last one and kind of the fun one. I try to save that. I know numbers usually isn't fun per se, but I thought this would be a little fun, kind of interesting, intriguing. The title of it is U.S. Census for the Treasure Valley / Boise. This comes by the Boise dev by Margaret Carmel. So a lot to unpack in the census report. There's stuff here I'm just going to have to skip over, but I'm going to highlight as much as I can and pull out some general notes that are interesting. I'd recommend go checking out the article. With that said, the article looks at the times between 2020 and 2021. All said and done, the Treasure Valley area passed 800,000 in population, now sitting at a roughly 811,000. Ada County added 23,943, and Canyon County added 19,959, kind of a little less there. Plus, when you add Owyhee County, Gem County, and Boise County, you get a total increase of 46,613 people since 2020. But it was not just the Treasure Valley area that grew. All but one of Idaho's 44 counties had population increase, and not all of it was in big city/urban areas. Rural areas such as Emmett grew from 19,126 to 20,418. And Boundary County, the part touching Canada, grew about 10.6% with 1,288 new residents since 2020. Bonner is in fourth place statewide, and Benoit, which we talked about earlier, with an 8.8% growth, which generally, yeah, we're growing. I mean, it comes with frustrations like here in the Valley, more traffic, all the road construction and stuff that's going on, and we don't like it. Don't get me wrong. I'm totally with you there. I don't like it. I like the rule. I've grown up here in Idaho my whole life. There's a feel I like, and it is kind of changing a bit, and that is true. But then on the other hand, I'm also welcome to new changes. Like, for instance, this growing population brings us stuff like In-N-Out. It brings us really cool thing. Other businesses, the Lego store I talked about a couple weeks back, that's going to be moving in here. It gives us a lot of these really cool businesses. Also, it gives the right that, like, I heard some tweets. I didn't talk about it because there wasn't a full article I could find on it. But the mayor of Boise talking about rail coming back, passenger train coming back to Boise and stuff. That only happens because of population, that the money, the businesses can warrant the amount of investment they need to do to get their return back. So good things and bad things, and we'll just have to work through it. But it is the nature of things to grow and to change. And still crazy to me to see that Bonner, or Boundary County up there by Canada, grew by 10.6%. That is a lot. 1,288 new residents since 2020. That is some serious growth. I don't think I've ever been up there. I have not gone all the way up to the border. I intend to try to maybe this year and next. I have no doubt it's really, really pretty up there. But yeah, that's crazy to see that growth. I wonder why, like if there was like some more jobs that opened up, or if there again, like we talked about earlier, some of the remote work kind of made that available and then people were able to do that. I could see that being just the main reason, more remote work, because here in Idaho, there are many people I've talked about here in the Valley, like, yes, I would love to move up into the middle of nowhere, into the mountains, into the small community. They don't care about the conveniences. They don't care about being able to see performances and be in the just connected with the developing trends and everything. They don't care about that. They just want to be up in the mountain, be peaceful and work and live their life. But a lot of them end up staying here in the Treasure Valley or over in eastern Idaho because they just can't find a job that they can do that will pay the bills in the way that they need to be paid or they want them to be paid up in some of these rural towns. So with remote work, that's becoming more and more and more possible for people to be able to do than it wasn't in the past, where, local small towns are like, okay, you're either in the lumber industry, you're in the forestry industry, you're in the service industry for like people and truckers driving through. There wasn't just a lot of work that you could do that would fulfill your needs up there. So that's kind of cool that modern technology has given people the ability to move where they want and how they want, which I think is cool, and I hope to be able to achieve that as well someday. But in any case, hopefully it was fun. I know it was kind of a little stretch for the last one. As I said, a little bit of a slow news week, but there will be a little bit more in the politics section, so I would recommend joining us over there. Now moving into the Quickies, we have our first one here, Antique Roadshow in Idaho. This comes by KTVB7 by staff. Antique Roadshow is a show that many of us know about or have at least heard of. It is put on by PBS and is a 20-time Emmy Award nominated series. The series travels around the country appraising people's antiques and collectibles. Well, the next 3 episodes are coming out on April 3rd, 10th, and 17th on PBS and live on their YouTube channel. So if you don't have the usual cable connections and everything, you can just use YouTube. The cool part is the one airing on the 10th, which was shot back in May, was here in Idaho at the Idaho Botanical Gardens. So you might want to check that out tonight if you're listening on Monday. Idaho gas prices better, sort of. This comes by KTVB7 by staff. Gas prices are 1 cent below the national average. Yay! This is the first time that this has happened in the last 8 months, but this is only due to the fact that gas around the nation has risen while ours has stayed the same. So actually not savings, but just everyone else is hurting more. This increase around the nation comes as OPEC announced that it will be cutting crude oil production by an additional 1 million barrels per day in May. Idaho's first TV station. This comes by KTVB7 by staff. April 3rd was KTVB7's 70th birthday. And for those that didn't know, they were the first TV station here in Idaho. They even had different programs and commercials that were broadcast live. They have a video talking about the history of the station. It is a very interesting one. I would actually recommend you go listen to it. Lastly, we come to our last quickie here. Caldwell pool update. This comes by the Boise Dev by Mariela Rodriguez. Hopefully I got that right. For those hoping that the Caldwell pool would be open, I hate to break it to you, but for the third year in a row, it will not. According to the city, they hope to have it ready by next summer. It was closed in 2021 because of an inspection discovering electrical issues that pose safety concerns to the public. As it stands right now, the project is $1 million over the initial budget that the city set for it. Moving into politics here, we have it divided into two halves if you haven't been here before. The first half is facts, where I just speak just purely as factual as I purely can get about what has happened, what hasn't happened, and just go through that. And then the discussion section is where then I will unpack, pick certain bits and pieces out of that I want to talk about, going to a little bit of a discussion, a little bit of my opinion, a little bit of some deduction, a little bit of some conversation, discussion on those topics, and then we close out the podcast and the political stuff. I recommend you stay for both of those, but if you don't care for my views and opinions, I would still please beg you to stay for the facts section, which we're going to start here now. First off, to note, the legislature has ended its session for this year, so there aren't any new bills being proposed. They've kind of finished up, so I'm just going to go through the bills that have been signed by the governor, and then there's one that was vetoed. In bills signed, we have House Bill 71, related to Vulnerable Children Protection Act, adds to existing laws to establish provisions regarding vulnerable children protection. The sponsors of the bill are Representative Bruce D. Skog, Senator Lori Den Harting, and Blaine Gonzatti of Idaho Family Policy Center. As for the status, it was signed by the governor on April 4th. Then we have House Bill 182, establishing clause and free speech compliance, adds to existing laws to establish provisions regarding prayer. The sponsors of the bill is Representative Barbara Earhart and Representative Brett J. Crane. As for the status, it was signed by the governor on March 31st. Then we have House Bill 294, related to state government, adds to existing laws to prohibit public entities from entering into certain contracts with companies owned or operated by the government of China. The sponsors of the bill is Representative Edward H. Hill and Representative Sage G. Dixon. As for the status, it was signed by the governor on April 3rd. Then we have Senate Bill 1173, related to prevention of public offenses, amends existing laws to provide for the defensive display or declaration of a firearm, and to provide the defensive display or declaration of a firearm shall not be required in certain instances. The sponsors of the bill are Senator Todd M. Lakely and Representative Judy Boyle. As for the status, it was signed by the governor on April 5th. Then we have House Bill 242, related to abortion, amends and adds to existing laws to provide for the crime of abortion trafficking, to provide certain requirements and restrictions on a civil action, and to provide prosecutory authority to Attorney General. As for the sponsors, Representative Barbara Earhart and Representative Kevin Andrus. As for the status, it was signed by the governor on April 8th. Then we have House Bill 295, related to firearms, adds to existing laws to prohibit the use of merchant firearm codes. The sponsors of the bill is Representative Edward H. Hill, Representative Judy Boyle, and Senator Tammy Nichols. Hopefully I got that last name right. As for the status, it was signed by the governor on April 5th. And then we have House Bill 1030, adds to existing laws to provide for the enforcement of federal immigration law by governmental entities in this state. The sponsors of the bill is Senator David M. Foreman and Representative Heath Scott. As for the status, it was signed by the governor on April 4th. Then we have House Bill 25, related to Capitol Building and Grounds, adds to existing laws to authorize the director of the Department of Administration to control the use of roadways adjoining the Capitol Building. The sponsors of the bill, or sponsor in this case, is Representative Joe A. Palmer. As for the status, it was signed by the governor on March 31st. That closes out the bills signed, and then in bills vetoed, the the main one here is House Bill 314 related to minors. Amends and adds to existing laws to prohibit certain materials from being promoted, given, or made available to a minor by a school or public library, and to provide for a cause of action. The sponsors of the bill were Senators Sidney Clarkson, Chuck Winder, and Representative Jaron Crane. It passed the House with a vote of 40-30, and the Senate with a vote of 26-9. It had a veto vote, but it failed on that, obviously, because it is failed. The vote was 46-24. They needed 47 to pass, so just one short. As for the status, the governor vetoed it on April 5th, and it was failed to be overturned by the House by one vote. Now, moving into the discussion section of the podcast, we'll start off with bills signed. I'm kind of going to jump through here really quickly because a lot of these we've already talked about at great length. I will just kind of give a little bit of opinion plus, some background of stuff that I may or may not have heard on them. I will admit probably a little bit of the gossip train, but it's the discussion section, a little bit more laid back, not as super formal, but still trying to make it entertaining and a little bit informative for you. We start off with House Bill 71 related to the Vulnerable Children's Protection Act, adds to existing laws to establish provisions regarding vulnerable children protection. It was signed by the governor on April 4th and was sponsored by Representative Bruce D. Skog, Senator Lauren Den Harding, I can't seem to get that name right, and Blaine Gonzatti of the Idaho Family Policy Center. We've talked about this a couple times on the podcast the past couple weeks, but this got signed. It was a little bit of a crazy thing. I know it passed the House and Senate, I think it was last week, if I remember correctly. But Governor Little said he was possibly going to veto it unless he got enough support. And so there was a phone line set up, and then people could call in to support it and stuff. And then they were just kind of taking things on the phone, I heard, and stuff, and just people's names. And then eventually it said, nope, we're scrapping that because we can't track, and people could be calling multiple times and messing up the system. So they set up an automated thing. I ended up doing it that you could call in, and then you'd say, hey, I'm calling in because of House Bill 71, press 1, and then you'd click that, and then you say, if you're in favor, press 1. If you're not in favor of it, press 2. And then it would only allow for one number at a time that was registered in the state of Idaho. And you could do that, and those counted, but the previous ones didn't. But in the end, all said and done, the bill did end up getting passed, which I am super excited about. For those that don't know what it is and maybe didn't hear last week's podcast, highly recommend going and listening to it. It was a fun one. That this bill basically just bans the procedures such as hormone replacement treatment therapy stuff and puberty blockers and sex reassignment surgeries where they're changing the genitalia. Granted, the bill, when I did read through it, it does allow for the provision of say some damaging thing happens or to your the reproductive area of your body, or they don't come out as they're supposed to be at birth or whatever. It still allows for those procedures, but it only allows for the procedure in the sense of that it affirms or fixes or repairs the already existing body part and things. It doesn't try to change it from one genitalia gender to another. That bans it. This goes into effect in January 1st of next year. So really, really great to see. If I remember correctly, let me skim through my notes here. Skim. Yeah, there's more on it later, but I won't spoil it. We've got some stories on it. Then moving on, we have House Bill 182 related to establishing clause and free speech compliance, adds to existing laws to establish provisions regarding prayer. The governor signed it on March 31st. Great to hear. It's just kind of extending that already existing thing of the right to free speech, but kind of on the precedent of that Supreme Court hearing. If you want to learn more about that, go back to the previous podcast, hear about that. Then we have House Bill 294 related to state government, adds to existing laws to prohibit public entities from entering into certain contracts with companies owned or operated by the government of China. It was signed by the governor on April 3rd. Here again, we've talked about it. Basically just saying if there is a company that has a majority controlling interest from China or its government, they're not allowed to be operating on public entities here in the state of Idaho, or if it's directly the country of China that they're trying to directly interact here in affairs in Idaho, they're not allowed to. That bill does that. Very, very glad to hear that. And then Senate Bill 1173, Prevention of Public Offenses, amends existing laws to provide for the defensive display or declaration of a firearm and to provide that the defensive display or declaration of a firearm shall not be required in certain instances. This is the bill that allows people to have a public display of their firearm. They don't have to hide it. It's not illegal. And if I remember correctly, if I'm remembering from everything and stuff, I don't have it right in front of me right now. It also allows for people to create private militias, where before it was actually technically illegal from what I understand, but now this law allows for people to have their private militias. It just says that the state or the county, it's the county or city or town or whatever, can't fund that. It has to be done 100% by people. It can't be given from any of the tax dollars and stuff. Any of those tax dollars generated by the city or town has to go directly to the National Guard, and that's the only place it can go. That's what that bill does. Really great to see all these things that have passed. Now we're going to move into the one bill that got vetoed. We have House Bill 314 related to minors, amends and adds to existing laws to prohibit certain materials from being promoted, given, or made available to a minor by a school or public library, and to provide for a cause of action. The sponsors of the bill are Senator Sidney Clarkson, Chuck Winder, and Representative Jaron Crane. It passed the House with a vote of 40-30, so a little close there, and the Senate with a vote of 26-9. As for the general status, as already talked about above, the governor vetoed it on April 5th, and it failed to be overturned by the House by one vote. They were just one short. On last Wednesday, Little vetoed the bill and wrote a letter to legislators telling them why he vetoed it, quoting from the letter, quote, allowing any parent, regardless of intention, to collect $2,500 in automatic fines, creating a library boundary system will only increase the cost local libraries incur, particularly rural libraries, Little wrote. These costs will be forced onto property taxpayers of Idaho or cause libraries to close to minors altogether. He also said he vetoed it because it was too ambiguous. The legislature reconvened Thursday to vote on an override of the veto. The House needed 47 votes, 2/3 to pass it. They were one vote short with a vote of 46-24. Sad to hear. I won't get into it a ton here, but just generally, as we've talked about in the past, or I've stated in the past, this is not bad. This is just saying minors, you can't see sexually explicit stuff. I know he's arguing for it's too ambiguous. I don't see how that is. The bill clearly states the standard that is stated by the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court has a certain standard or system of rules of knowing what is obscene material, and that is in the writers. That's what they did. That wrote this bill. Mr. Gonzatti, I think, was part of it, and Jaron there were involved. It uses those definitions that the Supreme Court has laid out for what is obscene material and uses it in their definitional system so that it is definable. It's not super vague. But I'm guessing Mr. Little's going to go on that. I feel like it's hiding behind stuff a little bit rather than actually dealing with the question at hand, saying, well, it's ambiguous. Well, why is it ambiguous? Well, you didn't say why it was ambiguous. You just went on, and then you went on money things. I understand the money cost reasons, but if we're promoting bad material, it's like, well, it would cost too much for us to, stop people from being murdered. Well, no, you stop murderers. It's not about the cost. It's that it is a moral wrong. Evil, it is wrong for us to not fight against murder because it's bad. We're not talking about cost, we're talking about right or wrong, and thus our laws should then accordingly do it. If we can't afford to fight which that is wrong, that is which is not permissible, then we need to have questions about our funding and what else we're funding that's not allowing the state to do its fundamental job, which is to protect the rule of law and the safety of its citizens. That would be my thing with the financial side that he's raising. But there are reasons to raise, I guess. I would disagree very much with Mr. Little on some things, especially this one. But sadly, this bill failed. It was really close in the House, so I think he felt confident to do that. But it is just sad to hear that it did not pass by just one vote. If it would just been one could have flipped, this bill could have made it through. I know the liberty type of thing, the right to hear all things gets trumped out in this argument, and there's a place for it. But I would argue all this is saying minors. The general public can see it. But if you're a minor, you don't need to be getting into these topics of sexuality. It is not the point and period for you to be doing this type of stuff, which I totally agree with. I know some people will disagree with that, but there is a line between when you're adult and these matters. Yes, we all have sexuality, but there are points when we're impressionable and we're illogical, shall we say. And these things are very powerful, very potent things, so we need to be careful at what ages and at what point and what maturity that those people are exposed to it. But in any case, that closes out kind of the bills I wanted to talk about. We'll get into some political stories here. First story here is about House Bill 71, ACL planning to challenge it. This comes by KTVB7 by Jude Binkley. As we talked about, House Bill 71 was signed by the governor last Tuesday. It bans medical providers in the state from giving puberty blockers, hormones, and gender-changing surgeries to minors. It goes into effect on January 1st of 2024. With that said, the ACLU, which stands for the American Civil Liberties Union, has stated that they will be legally challenging the law. In their words, quote, "From the ACLU's perspective, we are troubled by the bill for several reasons. It is unconstitutional, blatantly unconstitutional," Amy Dundon, legislative strategist for ACLU of Idaho, said. "The reason for that is because it discriminates against a class of people based on a transgender status and on sex. So singling out transgender youth and prohibiting their attainment of healthcare is discriminatory," end quote. As of the writing of this, they have not formally filed their challenge, but are preparing it and looking for other people to join them in the challenge before they file it. On the flip side, the author of the bill, Blaine Gonzatti, from the Idaho Family Policy Center, responded to the announcement of ACLU challenging the bill by saying, quote, "We're disappointed that ACLU would waste taxpayer dollars by attacking constitutionally sound, morally sound, scientifically sound legislation. It's well within the power of the state to regulate medicine when medicine goes awry and doctors violate their Hippocratic oath to do no harm," Gonzatti said. "This legislation is constitutional, it is legally sound and defensible, and will win in court," end quote. Totally agreeing here with Blaine Gonzatti. I think it makes perfect sense, but it does really depend on your position. One might ask, well, then why, if it's so cut and dry, do people have an issue with it? Well, that's where I think it comes down to a worldview, like any of this. If you come from the perspective that we live in a perfect world and that people are truly good, then you're going to act differently than the Christian, I would argue, that says that man is desperately wicked and sinful above all things. Then your laws and the way you look at it, that you live in a broken world, then you look at the way that your politics come. If you're looking at transgender and there being more than two genders in this world, then yes, this is discriminatory. If you truly believe that there are more than two genders in this world, then yes, this is discriminatory, it is unconstitutional, and it is bad, and this needs to be stopped. If you believe that premise, then you are being logically consistent, and I respect that. But on the other hand, if you're a person who believes that there are only two genders that exist, and to go outside of that to try to force people to get surgeries and different things is wrong, that it is encroaching, it is hurting, like Gonzatti gave us it, that you're breaking your Hippocratic oath as a doctor, then yes, we have full right as a government to ban that, to pass legislation to stop doctors from doing things which break their oath that they're giving, which doctors say do no harm. Not to mention the fact that there are many scientifically sound studies that I would also cite. I don't have them here, but if someone wants to reach out, maybe next week we'll do a segment because politics is going to slow down a little bit here, and I'm wanting to do some more like actual local Idaho research instead of relying on other researchers and doing some topics and stuff, that there are a lot of studies that show that those that transition, especially very young, have a lot of issues and a lot of regrets and problems, and suicide rates are very, very high. It's not good. It's not actually benefit. It would be one thing if you sat there and said, they did these surgeries and then all these kids had like amazing lives and they're blah, 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 and they're blah, 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 and blah, 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 right? That would be an argument, but I haven't heard a cogent argument and data to support that. I've heard data to support the contrary, that this is not good. This is not how, my belief, God designed you, that there is male and female, and in that we are different, but we're different in complementary roles, and thus we should embrace those roles, not try to tear them, break them down, and go to the other one, because that's not what you were designed. That's not what God made you for. Next one is List of Laws Passed. This comes by Idaho Dispatch by Sarah Clendenon. Sorry, I forgot your name wrong there. Last names seem to be hard for me. In this article, Idaho Dispatch reviewed some of the bills signed during this legislative session. I'm not going to go over all of them, but if you're interested in the source document for the show, there is a link for the full article so you can look at it. Here are some of the ones that I pulled out to share and highlight. Throughout this legislative session, we had Senate Bill 1029 related to proceedings, amends and adds to existing laws to prohibit child protection investigations based on a child's immunization status, and to provide that the court shall not grant or order terminating a parent and child relationship based on a child's immunization status. Then we have Senate Bill 1033 related to irrigation, adds to existing laws to prohibit the appropriation of groundwater for supplemental irrigation use. Senate Bill 1036 related to raw milk, amends existing laws to revise provisions regarding raw milk and raw milk production. Senate Bill 1041 related to county treasury and tax collector, adds to existing laws to authorize an account treasury to make certain investments. I think that one was on like the gold part, so the state can invest in gold assets. And then lastly, we have Senate Bill 1127, state symbols, adds to existing laws to designate Erectodormius as the state dinosaur. I'm not going to put a lot of commentary on this, but it's really cool to kind of go through and see all that was passed or not passed. A lot of it's kind of some fiscal stuff. There might be some things that I jumped over that you might find interesting, so I'd highly recommend you go and look at that, but I'm going to move on to the next one here. Boise school board member asked to resign. This comes by several sources. This is our last one here, but it's a little bit of a big one, so bear with me here. Last Tuesday night, one of the members of the Boise School District Board of Trustees and one of its youngest posted a tweet that has gotten him into some trouble. Raj Bhandari, hopefully I got that right, big mouthful there. It's a young man who ran to be on the Boise School Board of Trustees while he was still a senior in high school. During his 2022 campaign, he was endorsed by several local figures, such as Lisa Sanchez of the Boise City Council, Representative John Gannanam, and former Idaho Attorney General and Supreme Court Justice Jim Jones. Well, Tuesday, Shiva posted a tweet in response to Governor Little's passing House Bill 71, which prohibits medical providers from giving puberty blockers, hormones, and general changing surgeries. In it, he said, and removing some rather vocal words, quote, "Blank you, Governor Biden. I pray you live a long life so you can bear witness to the pain you've unleashed on Idaho's children and families," end quote. There is a second sentence to the tweet, but I know this show is listened to by families, so I'm not going to go into it on the podcast. You're welcome to go look for yourself. It caused quite a storm on social media, and the Boise School District had to issue an apology to Governor Little and disavowed the words of the board member, saying, quote, "The board of Boise School District does not condone, approve of, or endorse the language that Shiva Raj Bhandari used in his Twitter account. His words do not exemplify the dignity and respect the Boise School District works so hard to earn every day. His actions have also damaged our teamwork, which we strive so hard to build both on our board and in our district," end quote. With that said, there have been calls from the public for him to resign from the school board, but he doesn't seem to be backing down. KTV B7 interviewed him asking what his response was, and he said, quote, "I would not condone the language I use in my tweets in a board meeting or in a classroom, but we also have a responsibility to fight for our communities and to stand up for what's right when trans rights are under attack. We stand up and fight back, and I am proud to stand in solidarity with the LGBTQ community in Idaho, and I will never back down in my commitment to stand with my trans and non-binary friends and siblings," end quote. I saw this kind of happen in live time on Twitter, that I saw his post, or I don't think it was actually his post because I don't follow him, but I saw a person retweet a screenshot of his post, and then I responded to that. You can go look on Twitter to see that. And then later this came out and stuff. Yeah, it was just a really nasty tweet. There's a point to like what he's saying that, yes, I'll give you ground, sir, that, yeah, you have a right to disagree and voice your disagreement about what your politicians do and say. But we are not animals. We do it in a respectful and meaningful way that, yes, we disagree, but we disagree on our ideas, not as human beings. The words that were said, I would argue, attack the person, not the ideas that Mr. Little signed, but attacked him as a person. And any of these forms of politics and things, we are talking about ideas, we're talking about concepts, bills, and we attack those, not the people attached to them. That is an ad hominem attack, and that is vindictive and disrespectful to what you do. And that's kind of what I said on Twitter, that, you have to do it in a respectful way. As I said, we're not animals. There are ways to do this. There are responsible, respectful ways to disagree. And just because someone does you think is such a massive disavowal, even if I was sitting here and someone said that they are going to do murderous things or will go into like the Nazi realm or something like that, As a Christian, I would argue that still doesn't give us carte blanche. That gives us carte blanche to start using physical force, yes, because those people are now threatening the life of image bearers of God, of other human beings, and thus we then must use necessary force to protect those values, those lives that are far more valuable than ideas. And so, yes, that's where violence then is needed. But this level of violence just over a bill is not required. But then again, like we talked about earlier, I could see him validating that argument, being like, well, if there are more than one genders, then this is fully right. And I'd be like, I see what you're saying. If there are two genders, then this is or if there's more than two genders, this is a really, really, really bad thing. And a lot of people should be mad. And, you make a fair argument. I would disagree that there are more than two genders. There are only two genders. And thus your argument kind of fails there a little bit. But with that said, it still does not warrant the response you gave to Mr. Little and the level of disrespect. He was duly elected by the people, be it if you like what he does or not, but you need to be respectful to him and his leadership and the authority that God has given him. Give unto Caesar's what is Caesar's, and give unto God what is God's. And God has put him in that place of authority, and we need to be respectful. But we can disagree with him, and that's where I think we could have common ground there, sir. But this is just not good at all. I would agree. I hope he resigns. These words did not need to be spoken. This was just a malicious, mean attack. And someone who has these, I would argue, come from a certain idea and thought process in your mind and your heart and your belief. And I don't think you should be on a school board involved with minds and children, because you are dealing with some really strong emotions and issues, and I don't think you should be around and have the authority over children and the education that then goes into them. But in any case, thank you for listening to the whole podcast. I hope you enjoyed it and it was valuable for you. If I missed something, got something wrong, or you have some advice for the show, then send me an email at localyocalidaho2022@gmail.com or tweet me at localyocalidaho on Twitter. This show is a one-man show, so I can't afford to go over everything, but I hope I was able to cover as many of the big topics as possible. Thank you for your help and support. That's all for now, and I hope you have an excellent rest of your week. Godspeed.